Hey guys, it's me again. Welcome to our next presentation and overview for House on Mango Street. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the cultural integration within the text of the House on Mango Street. If you haven't guessed already, culture plays a pretty significant role in this book. First, I want to draw your attention to the picture on the screen of the house. This right here, it's not the actual house from the story. However, the original house was torn down, and so it doesn't actually even exist anymore. But there was a house directly across the street from the original house, and that is what this is a picture of. That is said to have been an exact copy, essentially, of the house that is in the book. And so this will give you a fairly good idea as to what kind of house we're talking about when we talk about the house on Mango Street. Now, let's get into this idea of culture a little bit more in depth. So, by now, you should know the following about our author, Sandra Cisneros. You should know that she was born in the Hispanic quarter of Chicago, Illinois in 1954. Now, when we say this idea of the Hispanic quarter, many cities are broken up into different neighborhoods that are predominantly a certain type of ethnicity. And so to say that Sandra Cisneros was born in the Hispanic quarter suggests that the neighborhood or the area of the city that she was born in was populated mostly by those of Hispanic ethnicity. Okay. She's the third oldest of 7. So she had 2 older and 3 younger siblings, or 4 younger siblings. And she's the only girl. So she is the only daughter, which means she had 6 brothers. She grew up in poverty. When we say the word poverty, I don't think we have a very good concept of what that means, but you'll get a better idea of what her version of poverty was as we go throughout our book. They moved often, a very transient style of living. Often as a result of the poverty, they couldn't pay their rent, or something happened in the apartment that they couldn't afford to fix, that kind of thing. And she was an introvert. Now, those of you who are introverts probably know. Introverts are people who are quiet. They tend to be shy. They're thinkers. They're not incredibly social people. They're not going to be the life of the party or the class clown. They're the ones that kind of sit back and just watch and take everything else in. She attended Loyola University, which is actually a fairly prestigious university. So it suggests that she had really good grades coming out of school, and is a very intelligent person who could do well at the caliber of university that Loyola is. She was an English major, which makes sense, right? She's an author. She wanted to become a writer. That was always her goal. She wanted to be a writer. However, initially, she was actually afraid that her underprivileged upbringing would be a disadvantage in a literary world. If you've ever been around a lot of very academic, very smart people, they they tend to be a little bit elitist. They tend to be arrogant. And she came from a world that was not like that at all. And so she didn't know if she could make it in that sort of situation. And so she was a little bit reticent, a little bit reluctant to pursue writing as a career because she thought she would be automatically kind of pigeonholed or at a loss because of the way she was raised and the situation that her family was in as she was growing up. Occupations throughout her lifetime included a teacher and a counselor to high school dropouts. Okay, so she specifically focused on students who had dropped out of high school, who didn't finish school. Okay, she wanted to help them. She wanted to focus on them and help them get out of their situation to improve their situation. She was a creative writing teacher. Again, that makes sense because she's a writer. And she was a college recruiter and arts administrator. The arts administrator thing I kind of want to draw a little bit of attention to. Just by looking at her pictures or pictures of her, you can tell she's an artistic person. She wears a lot of color. As we get into the book, you'll notice that she sees the world in a very particular, very singular, individual way. And I think a lot of that comes from this idea of the arts. She values things that are beautiful and values the creative process that goes into making those things. And we can see that through her literature. Now, keeping in mind the culture that Sandra Cisneros is bringing to this novel, I now want to talk about personal culture, which means your culture, your individual as a person culture. So my first question is, what is culture? If I were to say, please tell me about your culture, what would you say? How would you respond to that? I'm going to give you a second to think about it. How would you respond if I walked up to you or if I called on you in class and I said, Ransom, explain to me your culture. Or Amelia, explain to me your culture. Gavin, explain to me your culture. What would you say? I have a guess or a presumption that most of you would look at me and say, Mrs. Edmond, I don't understand the question. What do you mean, what's my culture? Some of you might think really quickly and say, well, my ancestors came from, let's say they came from Ireland. So I'm Irish. Is that part of my culture? Some of you might say, well, I had ancestors that were pioneers. Is that part of my culture? Well, of course it is. But culture has a lot more to it than just that. Does everyone have culture? Do I have culture? Do you have culture? What does it look like? How do you explain it? How do you conceptualize it? Or turn it from this nebulous concept that's floating around in the air into something that's tangible, something that's understandable? What does it mean? Does everybody have it? Can you share it? Can you adopt something that isn't originally yours? How does it work? Let's delve into this a little bit deeper. So if we talk about personal culture, obviously, it's something everybody has. Every single person on this planet has culture. Culture is made up of 4 different things. And those of you who decide to take my AP Geography class next year, we will delve into a little bit more detail as to what these things are. But essentially, it's broken up into these 4 categories. We've got tangible items. Those are the things that are that you can hold in your hand, right? Things that have mass, things that have shape. This is your art, your literature, your food, your fashion, your architecture, okay? All of those types of things would fit into tangible items. Customs and beliefs is the next one. This is where you get into your language and your religion, holidays, traditions, those kinds of things. Social forms. Social forms are comprised of your ethnicity. Ethnicity and culture are different, FYI. Ethnicity and race are also different. If you're curious as to why, come take AP Geography next year. But social forms are essentially what groups do you identify with? Are you a Republican or a Democrat? Or maybe you're a libertarian, or maybe you're a socialist. Ethnically, that's do you identify with a certain ethnic group? Individual values is the last one. These are your personal, individual things that you find important, okay? Your personal preferences, likes and dislikes, hobbies, your morals, okay? All of that fits into here. So with these 4 things, What does your personal culture look like? Now, let's look at Mrs. Edmonds' personal culture. This is actually an assignment that I make you do next year in AP Geography if you take it. But it's essentially, I want you to take a minute or a few minutes to brainstorm what the core elements are that comprise your own personal culture. You might want to jot that list down. It's actually the Canvas discussion question that goes with this PowerPoint. And so let's look at what Mrs. Edmond has on hers. The first one, so the one that's in the middle, this is my big one, is a picture of my family. Okay. These are my people. These are the people that I would do just about anything for. Now, this is just my immediate family. I have a sister and I have some nieces and nephews. My parents, obviously. But family is really big. Big for me, probably big for most of you guys as well. Up here, you'll notice I have a Y. I went to BYU. I graduated from BYU. Which is a little bit tricky because my husband went to and graduated from the U, and so there's a little bit of conflict there and some competitiveness. You'll notice the various balls up here that I have: a volleyball, a basketball, a football. Volleyball and basketball are sports that I played growing up, middle school, high school, college. They're also sports that I coached, which is where this whistle comes in. The football it's just a love. I love the game. I love watching it live, on TV, college, pro. I love it all. My husband was a football coach. That's something we had in common really early on when we first started dating. And so, football is just something that really brings me together with the people that I love. This music has always played a really big role in my home. There was always music. I played the piano. My mom and sister both played the piano as well. My dad plays the guitar. There was always singing. There was always music. This right here is because I'm a teacher. I love to teach. I kind of came into teaching in a roundabout way, but I truly feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be and I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. This is the state of California. I'm originally from California. I feel like a lot of who I am is because I grew up in California. I feel a lot of core ties to that state and to some of the ideas that are associated with that state. I love the trees. I love the beach. I love being outside and just the whole idea of being one with nature. That's very much comes from my upbringing in California. The car is because we love road trips. We take road trips a lot. It's a little bit harder with a toddler than it was when we were just a couple. But we love just getting in the car and taking a trip. To Kill a Mockingbird is my favorite book in the entire world. As an English teacher, I read a lot, and I like a lot of books. But To Kill a Mockingbird is 100%, without a doubt, my favorite book ever. The map is for a couple of reasons. It actually serves a couple purposes. Number one, I teach geography. And so maps are something that I really love. I've always been drawn to them. But I also love to travel. I've been some pretty cool places in the world. I have some other cool places that are still on my list where I want to go at some point. But I just love exploring all of the different cultures and all of the different natural formations and landforms and climates and everything that goes with traveling. I love it all. Except to planes. I really don't like airplanes. I don't like traveling by airplane at all. But I do it because I love to travel. The flag, obviously, probably self-explanatory. I'm American. I'm very patriotic about it. And then this is a picture of the Draper Temple. It's where my husband and I were married. It also is a nod to my religion. I am LDS. You guys know that. I should say I'm of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. which is a very fundamental part of who I am. Okay. Now, I'm not going to have you put together an entire culture bag like I did, but I do want you to kind of think through some of the components that really make up who you are, that you value, that you think are important. Things that you think are important now and things that you can see yourself thinking are important 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now too. Oh, one more thing I forgot to tell you. This right here. If anybody knows what that is, bonus points for you. This is an Able Skeever skillet. If you've never heard of Able Skeevers, Able Skeevers are these little spherical pancakes. They're Danish pancakes. My ethnicity is Denmark. I'm from Denmark. And so growing up, we always had Able Skeevers. I have an Able Skeever pan here. I make Able Skeevers. They're delicious. If you've never had them, find someone who knows what they are and knows how to make them well and make them for you, because they're to die for. So good. And so the Able Skeever pan represents a couple things. First of all, I do love to cook. And secondly, I am Danish. So that is my nod to my heritage and my ancestry. Okay. All right. So think through what you would value as your personal culture and components of your personal culture, and then you're going to comment in Canvas about it next. That's the next assignment. Now, if we go back to our text, Esperanza and Sandra Cisneros, actually both, they are Chicanas. Chicana is a Mexican-American woman. Okay, so she's got ancestry, sometimes very recent ancestry, maybe even parents, who are from Mexico, and yet she is American. Okay, the term Chicana is more specific than Hispanic or Latina. Hispanic or Latina both just suggest someone who is from Latin America, but Latin America covers everything from Mexico to Brazil to Ecuador and Guatemala and Panama and Colombia and everything in between. Okay, there's a lot of differentiation within Hispanic or Latina. She specifically is Chicana. She's Mexican American. So Sandra Cisneros and Esperanza. So I think this is the first time I've introduced you to Esperanza. Esperanza is our main character in our text, The House on Mango Street. They're both Chicanas. The identity of being Chicana, both being Mexican American and being a woman, plays a central role in both their lives. By now you know that The House on Mango Street is not about Sandra Cisneros. Sandra Cisneros is not Esperanza. But there are an awful lot of parallels. And I think much of what Esperanza experiences in the book does kind of parallel or speak to the different experiences that Sandra Cisneros had growing up as well. And so there's definitely a lot of similarity and commonality between the two, but they are not the same person. However, this idea of being Mexican American and being a woman, especially at the time that the book is set, it plays a really big role. Okay, so we need to keep that in mind as we go through. Especially, well, let's just, next slide. So, I want to talk just briefly about stereotypes, specifically cultural stereotypes. Now, you guys know what a stereotype is. A stereotype is an individual's set of beliefs about the characteristics or attributes of a group. A very common stereotype that we talk about, or I hear a lot, is that people who are African American tend to be good at sports. Okay, that's a stereotype. Such attributes can typically consist in general psychological traits and behaviors considered typical of the members of the social category. Now, of course, the tricky part with stereotypes is it becomes a stereotype because it is considered typical of the members of this category. So when I say African Americans are good at sports, that would be typical of African Americans, right? But where we run into issues with stereotypes is that not all people in a category fit the stereotype. And so what we run into is we have these stereotypes that we've already predetermined, or society has predetermined. And then when we meet someone who fits into the social category that we have a stereotype about, we assume that that person also fits the stereotype. And that is not the case. In fact, the more you get to know people on an individual basis, the more you realize that the stereotype is a generality. It is not indicative of even the majority most of the time. Okay? So we have to be really careful. Sandra Cisneros hits this concept of stereotypes pretty strongly in the book. And we need to keep in mind and keep an open mind about what culture looks like, how it plays a role, and make sure that we don't pigeonhole or put people into categories that they don't belong in, especially before we get to know them, okay? Or characters into categories before we get to know them. So over here in the teal box on the left-hand side of the screen, it says, this book will identify and challenge many cultural stereotypes. We must be better at identifying stereotypes that exist in our own. Sorry, let me just move this over. There we go. We must be better at identifying stereotypes that exist in our own thinking and realize that a single individual does not represent an entire group. Okay? Nor do the experiences of a single individual represent the experiences of an entire group. Okay, we have to be really careful about that. All right. And lastly, I want to bring up this idea of social commentary, because just like social or cultural stereotypes, Sandra Cisneros also uses The House on Mango Street as a social commentary. Now, if you've never heard the term social commentary before, that's okay. But let me tell you what it is. Social commentary is the act of expressing an opinion on the nature of society. And so when people, maybe you hear your parents complain about the president, or you hear your parents complain about kids these days, or you hear your parents or your grandparents complain about Congress, or the way things were in their time. That's all an example or a different version of social commentary. Now, social commentary within our text, it might be obvious, or it might be a hidden message in the literature. So you have to kind of read between the lines or look for the symbolism. There is a lot of social commentary in House on Mango Street. So over again in the teal box, Sandra Cisneros uses her book as a platform to comment on the state of society in lots of areas, specifically culture, the role of women, education, immigration, poverty, etc. Those are just some of the big ones. Social commentary is essentially a way for the author to embed her opinion into her literature. Okay? Now, most important part. You don't have to agree with her opinion, but you do have to respect it. As we go through and read The House on Mango Street, there might be parts where you're like, no, I don't think that's true, or I don't agree with that, which is fine. I certainly don't expect you to agree with everything that every author writes. However, it is important for you to be able to put yourself in her shoes and see if you can see things from their perspective. And whether or not you agree with it, my goal is that you understand it. Okay? Understanding does not have to equal agreement. Just understand it. Okay? So with that, we're going to end this presentation. That's the end. One more note I want to talk about really briefly with this idea of culture. Most of you are not Chicanas. You are not Mexican American women. You have never been a Mexican American woman. You will never be a Mexican American woman. And so it might be a little bit trickier or harder for you to find some commonality with our main character. However, this book is about Esperanza growing up, figuring out who she is, finding where she wants to be and where she belongs. And through that process, she discovers things about her culture. She discovers things about her gender. She discovers things about education and her family situation and all of these different kind of things that she comes to realize. And her culture plays a big role in that. And so I think in that sense, every single one of you can relate to what she goes through, because in some sense or another, we're all still trying to figure out where we fit, right? And our culture and the people around us play a big role in how we do that. And so please look at the story that we're going to read as this example of this young girl who's pretty much your guys' age, even a little bit younger, of her trying to figure out who she is and where she fits. It is written through the lens of a Mexican American woman, but we can all find some commonality in the fact that we all want to know where we fit, and we all have to go through that process, sometimes multiple times throughout our lives. So please keep that in mind as we get into our story. And I think this is the last thing you guys do before you actually read part of the book. And so kind of keep all of these things in mind as you get into these first few vignettes. And I will see you next time.